Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Yes, so I went ahead and went back a couple days and grabbed the Hikaru Nakamura versus Wesley Speed Chess Championships match that they played. This is the 29th game that they played with each other. And so I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. And as always, to my people in the Philippines, I will say mabuhay and kamusta na. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking my video. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by and looking at my stuff. But if you guys are ready to go, this is the light analysis video, so I'm gonna run through it a lot quicker than my previous video. So let's get rolling. So we do see E4. Let me get my volume up. Bam. We got G6. We got D4, bishop to G7, knight to F3, D6. Bishop to C4. You have a couple different options, I mean, in this position. I mean, you can play like just a knight here. You can play the bishop here. You can also go for King's Indian Larsen type of C4 situation. This depends on how you feel. So Hikaru Nakamura felt like bishop C4. Knight comes to F6. We see queen to E2. We got castles by black. And so what we have here is most specifically a modern, but it can also be known as the King's Indian. This is a very, typical King's Indian type of situation. You just castle real quick, get your bishop fianchetto, the knight out, and play D6 because E5 can be somewhat annoying. In this particular position, it is playable because you have moved the queen away from here, so you don't have to worry about like a queen swap line. So the pawn does push to E5. We see pawn taking E5, pawn taking E5, knight comes to D5. And then, like I said before, we did see the queen move, so we're not double attacking this square. So it is safe to move your knight to D5. We got H3, and then we see C6, just ensconcing that knight onto D5. We got castles by white. And, I mean, everything is very solid for white. I mean, this is a really nice position. It's not like it's like crazy one or anything, but, this is definitely the way you want to play if you're white. So the knight comes back to B6, hitting the bishop with a tempo. And, I mean, you can leave it there, but, usually in an open position, you do want to preserve your bishop. So the bishop does come back to B3. We see A5, and this is the novelty of the game. In the past, we have seen knight to A6. I believe that was the move, but we do see A5 here, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, of course, you do, as black, want to trade off at least the bishop. So, A4 would be forcing the bishop to come back to C4 and allow this trade right here. So first, we hit the queen with the tempo with rook to D1, and this is not forcing the queen to C7, but this is pretty much one of, a few places that the queen can go and develop at the same time. So the queen comes to C7, and then now we see A3 creating a little lift for our bishop. We got knight to A6, bishop comes to E3. And so this is a really nice move. It is very typical of this type of position to move bishop to E3, controlling this diagonal. Controlling this diagonal. Bam. But also you are tying this queen down now to the protection of this knight, because it is not super safe to move the knight to D5 at the moment because you just have it fully covered. So the bishop does come to F5. We see knight to C3, rook A to D8. And we have actually reached a really, really nice position for white. And I ask you in this position, if you do want to stop the video and see what white has the ability to play here, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So, I mean, you have you have some options in the position. One of the more thematic moves, there's two thematic moves in the position. The one that Hikaru Nakamura did choose, which was fully sound, was actually G4. And it might look kind of strange. It might think, you might think like, man, you're kind of like opening your king up a little bit. But the good thing about the situation is that black doesn't have like a lot of pieces on the king side to really attack your king. So this isn't really exposing your king, so bad. So that is what he actually played in the game, and then the bishop just retreated to C8. But getting back to this position, the move that I was looking for, super thematic, was E6. E6 is a very common move to make in these modern in King's Indian structures because usually the E-pawn hasn't moved. Not always, but sometimes it hasn't moved. So you have the ability to either give you a far past pawn or to mess up black's pawn structure. So after we would see something like bishop takes e6, the bishop would take e6, pawn would take e6, and then you have knight to g5. And as you can see, you know, black is kind of tied down to the protection of this knight, so they don't really have a good way to defend this pawn. So it will be dropping, and then black will have some weaknesses in their pawn structure. So this definitely gives white a really, really nice game. But like I said, we did not see that. The bishop did come back to c8 after g4. We see knight over to e4. We see knight to d5. Bishop comes to g5. We got h6. Bishop comes back to c1. We do have b5. There isn't really a super lot for black to really do in the position right here. So b5 is one of the most logical moves to make. But I mean, you do kind of have maybe trying to solidify the position a little bit over here on the king side. But I mean, you are thinking about, you know, exposing your king just a little bit too much with any further pawn moves on that king side. So b5 makes a lot of sense. So we do have a4. We got b4. We see c4. And this is kind of the point in the game that, I mean, black actually starts to gain a little bit of an edge. Like, they were like really, really kind of hopeless before. And it was definitely Hikaru's game to lose because of the way that he was just literally playing the first about, like, let's say, you know, 15, 16 moves. It was killer. And so this definitely is allowing black to kind of climb back into the game a little bit. So we do see pawn taking c3, pawn taking c3. The bishop does come to e6, but I think most of you guys can notice that bishop to e6 is actually a horrible blunder by Wesley, because his knight is really just all alone on a6. And I think when he made the move, I believe this is the bullet portion already. So when he made the move, he probably just completely overlooked that he was hanging his knight. But Hikaru said, "Give me the knight." So he just takes the knight off the board and says, "Thank you very much." And then we do see somewhat of a tactical move, trying to kind of confuse the situation. And these types of moves, even though they're not the greatest, they can be kind of hard to deal with in a bullet game. But this is Hikaru Nakamura, so, I mean, you know, he's not easily thrown by stuff like that. So the knight does come to b4. But the unfortunate thing for Hikaru is he doesn't completely play this correctly. Rook takes on d8. Knight takes on e6, rook takes on f8. We see the king taking on f8, and then we do see bishop taking e6 and pawn taking e6. So there is a definite slight edge for black in this position. We do see rook over to b1. Obviously, you know, you have your rook, and this is the only available file to move to immediately. So, I mean, this makes a lot of sense. We do see g5, and this is a pretty crucial move because, you know, the bishop is wanting to ideally come to f4 or like e3 or something like that. But this is just making sure that white can't take advantage of either one of those squares. So this knight is a little bit more tied down than you'd like for it to be. So we do see bishop to e3. The king comes down to f7. We see rook up to b6. I mean, this knight is, you know, at the moment undefended. So why not attack it? You know, get you a nice little tempo. So the knight comes back to b8. And then we actually see a piece sacrifice. You know, it's not the absolute soundest, but, you know, you do have situations where it makes some sense simply because your pieces like are really, really tight down. So one of the ways to try to free pieces is to sacrifice a piece just to kind of give yourself some breathing room. So this is a definite positional sacrifice, and there wasn't really a lot better that you could have done in the position anyway. So the pawn takes g5. We see knight taking g5 with check. The king comes back to g8. Of course, we are not going to see king to f8 because that is going to be cry a river. So we're not even doing that, man. We're going to go ahead and go back to g8. Just make the nice little retreat. The knight takes on e6. We got queen up to c8. We see the knight taking on g7, king taking on g7. It kind of seems like white's okay because, you know, white has so many pawns. Yeah, they're down a little bit, but, I mean, they seem like they could be hanging in there. But it is just an illusion. We do have e6, and of course you can't take because this will be deflecting the queen away from the protection of this knight. So we have to do something about the knight first. So we do see c5. We got rook down to b5. We're still holding on to the attack on the knight, but we're starting to attack some targets in black's position. We do see knight to c6, rook taking c5, queen taking e6. And I mean, as you can see, you know, when the pieces start to get reduced, it just kind of just extends the advantage for black. So we do see king to g2. The queen comes down to e4 with check. The king comes to g3. We see king sidestepping over to f7. We got h4. And then we actually see knight to e5. And it is in this position that Hikaru Nakamura does resign the game. And I mean, the majority of the reason why is because you do have a double attack on this pawn, and you literally have no way to protect it. I mean, you don't really have the ability to swing the rook over here and check and kind of come back with something like this, you know, trying to get you a tempo. So you are really, really stuck. And black is going to get a situation rolling where they are going to be able to consolidate the position and just start to kind of mop up white's pawns. So this is a horribly lost game. So that is why he resigns. And as you guys know, Wesley So was defeated by Hikaru Nakamura, but this is one of the games where he was able to, you know, hold on for the win. Hikaru Nakamura, he was just like really just doing too great that day. I mean, it was a really convincing win that he had in that match between him and Wesley. So the Dingler-in match was definitely a lot closer, and he barely won that one. So that was really more of a final. But I appreciate everybody very much. Salamat aking makaibigan, and I will see everybody next time.